Hello, everyone. Welcome to Understanding Financial Aid for New Students. I want to be among the first to congratulate you on your admission to Stony Brook University. For those of you joining us who've already made your decision and you know that you're coming to Stony Brook, we are excited to welcome you to the Seawolf community. For those that are still figuring out where you're going to be in August, we hope that we're providing as much information as we can to get you to that point. So again, thank you for joining us. During the presentation, if you have questions related to the topics, you can use the Q&A to ask those. And we have the entire team from the Financial Aid Office here behind the scenes to help answer your questions. And I am thrilled to introduce our special guest who will be presenting for you this evening, Nick Pruitt, the Director of Financial Aid. Thank you, Nick.
Hey, good evening, everyone. Thanks for taking the time out of your lovely Tuesday evening. The weather here on Long Island is starting to feel like spring, so thanks for giving up a little bit of daylight to come and talk about financial aid with all of us. We're going to go through a few slides. Feel free to use the Q&A session. As Amanda said, we have a ton of folks working behind the scenes if you have questions. Sometimes people have really specific questions. If it's super specific, we might kind of touch on it in general, but if you have a specific question, drop us an email. Our office prides itself in responding quickly to all of our email inquiries, and so we're looking forward to helping you on what your specifics are. So let's go through this with you. All right. Amanda said, a lot of families are still trying to pick out which college that they want to attend, and kind of what we want to work on tonight is really kind of helping you understand exactly what types of questions you should be asking. One of the most important questions to ask is, how much does it cost to go to college? And so we call that the cost of attendance. Every school in the country is required by law to publish a cost of attendance. That is a cost of attendance number that includes tuition, fees, housing, books, transportation, and personal expenses, or everything that we would assume you to have an expense if you're going to college. We often hear from students who say, well, why are you including housing if I'm going to be living off campus or if I'm going to be living at home? Well, for federal financial aid purposes, we're required to construct that budget. It doesn't mean that those will be direct costs to you. It just means that we estimate that you are going to have those costs while you're going to be in school. So we'll go into those in a little bit greater detail in a little bit, and we'll talk a little bit more about the cost of attendance. The other piece is really, how is financial aid determined? So the first thing that we do as a school is we calculate what our estimated cost of attendance is. You'll hear me say estimated cost of attendance because sometimes we have students that their expenses will be slightly above that. Sometimes they'll be slightly below that, but we still set what that cost of attendance is going to be. We take that cost of attendance number, and for everybody who's already filled your FAFSA, you guys are doing great. The FAFSA determines what's called an SAI, or a Student Aid Index. That is how much the U.S. Department of Education believes your family should be able to contribute towards the cost of education. We subtract that cost of attendance from the Student Aid Index, and we determine how much financial need that you have. We always like to be upfront at Stony Brook. We are a large public flagship institution from the state of New York, and we do not have the resources to meet 100% of everyone's financial need. So we use that need determination to really kind of allocate many of our limited funded programs. When we talk about those funded programs that we offer, Stony Brook offers financial aid that would include grants, scholarships, work study, and loans. A lot of families say, well, I know I'm not going to qualify for any grants. Should I fill out the FAFSA? We encourage everyone to fill out the FAFSA. In fact, in New York State, it's required as part of your high school graduation to make sure you complete the FAFSA. So if you want to take out student loans at some point and you have a FAFSA on file, we can usually process those in a few days for you. If you have to start the process all fresh, it usually takes a couple of weeks. Once again, another reason for everyone to go ahead and fill out the FAFSA. All right, so what exactly is financial aid? We are starting to get a lot of emails and questions and say, hey, you gave me student loans and we don't consider that financial aid. We actually do, and for federal aid purposes, let's kind of break this down for you a little bit. Financial aid consists of funds that would be used to cover the cost of your education. We would determine that to be any types of grants, scholarship, loans, or work study. Those scholarships could be from Stony Brook, they could be from an academic unit on campus, or they could come from a local Rotary, a local charitable organization that is providing scholarships to you. They are provided directly to students or families to help pay for the cost of education. And so that's what our office does. We coordinate and we process those. These typically fall into two major types. One, it would be gift aid. These are scholarships and grants. These are what you don't have to pay back. Self-help aid would be loans or any employment opportunities that may be there. When you are applying for financial aid, we have a variety of different sources. When we think of federal financial aid, we think of filling out the FAFSA and qualifying for that. When we think about state financial aid, we think of filling out a TAP application or an Excelsior application with HESC. We'll go into greater detail about those. Any student who applies to the university, our admissions team takes a look at your academic record, and we make awards. We call those presidential scholarships here at Stony Brook, and I think those are an important part of that. There are private sources, like I talked about earlier, Rotary organizations, charitable groups. We see some students who bring in a lot of private scholarships. Sometimes private scholarships are really kind of one-time funds. A student is graduating and we want to support a high school student. These could also be part of like civic organizations or churches. Lots of people like to give out money to high school students to really help them make it all the way through. The other part is employers. We see a number of employers here on Long Island or in New York State that have some type of employee scholarship program. We would encourage you to sit down with your parents or the parents that are on this video tonight. Take a look and see what types of opportunities your students have or what your employers might be providing for students. Sometimes those are $1,000. Sometimes those are interest-free loans. You would be surprised at how many opportunities there are out there like that. All right, so let's start with the first one, right? We're going to talk about grants and scholarships. So what's the difference between a grant and a scholarship? Well, the key part is you don't have to repay it, so that's an important part. But a grant usually has some type of financial need base that is to it. The way we at Stony Brook determine how a student has financial need, and we'll go into a few more slides to talk about this again, but financial need really comes from determining the FAFSA. We use that as what we call a means tested benefit to determine how much a family has as an ability to pay compared to other families in the same situation. Doesn't mean that you may have more money than another family, may not mean that you have that money to pay for it, but that's what we use as our means tested benefit to really determine that. Scholarships are really merit-based, and they're awarded based on either your academics, your talent scholarships. Sometimes music programs offer music-specific scholarships, or maybe some types of other achievements. A valedictorian or salutatorian. These are types of scholarships and programs there. You're going to hear me say FAFSA many, many times tonight, but how do you apply? Well, as I said before, to graduate from a high school in the state of New York, you need to complete a FAFSA. So we encourage everyone to do that. Right now, we're on track. We're above FAFSA completion for last year. Last year had a few challenges. And I think if you are on this call and you haven't filled out your FAFSA, our friends in admissions have probably sent you a few reminders to hurry up and get that FAFSA in so that we can start making those determinations. There are also scholarship search websites. We always encourage people to use the reputable ones. Big ones that come to mind are fastweb.com, scholarships.com. You should never have to pay to apply for a scholarship. All right, so student loans. What are loans? When are they available and what are their terms? All right, so this presentation is really targeted towards first-year students, the people that are going to join us in fall of 2025. So a high school senior coming in as a first-year student at Stony Brook University, the maximum amount of loans that they can borrow would be $5,500 for the year. How do you get that? You fill out the FAFSA. What the FAFSA is going to do is determine whether that's going to be a subsidized loan, meaning the government's going to pay the interest while you're in school, or an unsubsidized loan. There are also federal caps on what those loan amounts are. So the maximum you could get in that subsidized loan would be $3,500. And then you can also get an additional $2,000 in an unsubsidized loan. Subsidized loans are need-based. The government pays the interest while you're in school up until the time that you graduate. Unsubsidized loans means the interest starts to build from the time the loan is dispersed. In our financial aid offer sheet, and I'll show that in a few slides, we're going to show kind of what the interest rates are. The interest rates for federal student loans are set by Congress, and they're set by the last Treasury bond sale in the month of May. So we're a couple of months out from determining what those loan interest rates are going to be for next year, but we'll talk about that in a little bit when we go over the financial aid offer sheet. Another option for paying for college is what's called a Parent Plus loan. This is a loan that the parents are going to take out in their name to help pay for the cost of college. The loan is in their name. Repayment on those would start 60 days after the final disbursement. So if you took out a loan for the fall and spring terms, repayment would start kind of about right now in that March timeframe. There is an option for parents to defer that loan while students are in school. Those kind of come down to an individual family situation. So we really want to make sure that you and your family are having conversations about what the loan options are. Another option that's available out there is what's called a private student loan. These are loans that are from a private student lender. So think of a bank or think of student loans associated with a lender, and you can probably come up with who those are. On our website, we have a list and a tool that kind of breaks through and kind of gives you an idea of what the interest rates are going to be. One of the primary differences between a federal student loan is that a federal student loan is insured by the federal government and the interest rates are fixed, and the federal government is the holder of that loan. Private student loans are held by the banks, and those rates are going to be variable, as are the repayment terms. And so that's where each bank is going to have a different kind of criteria. There would be a credit check involved with both a Parent Plus loan and a private student loan, but those criteria are probably going to be slightly different depending on what the credit market is really going to be. All right, work study is another big topic on campus. Work study is where students are working part-time on campus to help cover what the cost of their education is. Work study is a need-based program, and a student does need to complete a FAFSA. We receive as a campus about $1.6 million of work study each year. We spend about between $5 and $6 million on campus in student employment programs. So just because work study isn't part of your financial aid offer package doesn't mean that you can't find a position on campus. Work study jobs are all posted on a website through our Career Center. It's called Handshake. If you're playing along at home and you're listening along, you can type in Handshake Stony Brook. You can kind of get an idea of what the jobs that are currently listed out there for our students for this 24-25 year. Jobs for the fall semester typically start being posted sometime in July or August. Our team, we employ between 15 and 18 student workers in our office. We usually like to try to interview and select them in the summer, and then that way they're ready to start during the fall semester, and we do some training programs. But those jobs could be at the rec center, which is what you see in the picture on our screen. They could be working in the financial aid office, helping other families as kind of like a peer advising piece. In the advising center, the career center, lots of different opportunities on campus for that. Campus minimum wage, it kind of factors in. Our campus minimum wage, I think, is $16.50 an hour for jobs. Might be a little bit more than that. I'm not super expert on that, but I think that works. All right, so now we're going to start getting in a little bit more to understanding your financial aid offer. And I've seen a few questions kind of pop in the Q&A. Ideally, if you have applied to Stony Brook, you've been admitted to Stony Brook, you've received a scholarship offer at the time of admission, and we have your FAFSA, then that means that we most likely sent out a financial aid offer to you. There was a big group that went out on the 3rd of March. There were some that went out in January. There were some that went out in February in large batches. Those email communications go directly to the student, in that we're going to say, hey, log into our website and take a look at our system, which is called Solar. And then we're also going to send along a shopping sheet. I'm going to go through very much in detail in a couple of slides about what's included on our shopping sheet. We really want to be transparent and let you know what the costs are, what the charges are, and how your financial aid factors into that. Another thing that a lot of families do is they start comparing financial aid offers between different institutions. So what we want you to do, we started with talking about the cost of attendance. We really want you to pay close attention to what the cost of attendance is at the institution that you're looking at. From that cost of attendance, we want you to take off grants and scholarships, because those are free aid that you don't have to repay back. And then that gives you kind of your net cost. After that, we can talk about student loans, and then we can talk about what your total cost to attend is going to be. We also want to be very specific about the difference between direct costs. Those are costs you pay directly to Stony Brook. So that's tuition fees, housing, and meals. Other costs that you may have, or indirect costs, would be personal expenses, transportation costs, and books. I always like to say those are costs you're going to have whether you're a senior in high school or a freshman in college. All of those kind of factor in. Each year you do need to file a FAFSA, and each year we do send out a financial aid offer kind of letting you know what you're going to be eligible for. If your family's income changes drastically from year to year, then you may see some changes in maybe some of the need-based awards. But scholarships are renewable, so as long as you're meeting those criteria, you'll see those on your awards, and we'll kind of process through there. All right, so you're going to hear me talk about FAFSA for a little bit. The FAFSA, the free application for federal student aid. If you're in this call and you haven't filed your FAFSA, please do so immediately. If you have filed your FAFSA and you haven't really heard or you have some problems, please let us know. And that's when you would want to reach out. Sometimes the U.S. Department of Education follows up and they ask us to follow up with students. So lately we followed up with a few students who they entered a social security number, but it didn't match with the Social Security Administration. In that situation, the Department of Education typically wants us to collect, a copy of a birth certificate or a copy of a passport, just to verify the identity of the individual that's going through there. It's not uncommon for us to request information. We have a few hundred students that we are required to ask for some additional information. That's where we want to verify the information that's actually reported on the FAFSA forms, different things like that. When you're filing a FAFSA, I don't want to spend too much time on this. Hopefully you've already filed it, but if you haven't filed your FAFSA, the student is going to create an account. They're going to create a federal student aid ID. They're going to complete their section, and then they're going to be asked to enter an email that goes to the parent, and then the parent would need to have a federal student aid ID. They would log in, and then they would complete their information. There is now a direct data exchange with the IRS. And so basically when you're filing the FAFSA, it goes out to see if you filed the FAFSA or filed the tax return, it imports that information, and then it's going to ask for a few more bits of information that may not be included on a tax return, just to make sure that we're verifying and we're doing that. Also, let me mention there's a QR code on a few of the screens. If you scan those, that'll take you directly to a few websites. This is one that will take you to the Federal Student Aid website as we're going along through there. So a student aid index, we talked about this a little bit before. I'm going to show a little graph about how that compares to the cost of attendance. But this is the student aid index. You're going to have the same student aid index at Stony Brook or any of the institutions that you're going to apply to. We're going to take that student aid index and we're going to subtract that from the total cost of attendance to determine exactly how much federal financial aid that you're going to receive and determine what that need level is. That student aid index is made up of a parental contribution and a student contribution. So if you take a look here, you can see that the cost of attendance is variable between institution 1, institution 2, and institution 3. The student aid index is going to stay the same. So we're going to subtract that from the total cost of attendance and then determine exactly what your financial need is and exactly how much financial aid that you're going to qualify for. If you have filed your FAFSA and we have received it, you should have received a financial aid offer letter. If you haven't, that's a good opportunity to maybe drop us an email, financialaid@stonybrook.edu, and we can kind of take a look, but most of those notices have gone out. The only reason that it wouldn't is if there's some type of mismatch issue. Maybe you didn't provide your social security number when you applied and we weren't easily able to match you to your application. And there are a few other things. We can always take a look at that and double check for you. I see a few of those questions that kind of pop through. All right. New York State residents are eligible for a program called TAP. If you haven't filed a TAP application, we would encourage you to do that. By and large, the TAP program, as well as the Excelsior program, which is going to be one of the next slides that comes up, really are designed for families that make under $125,000 on a New York State filed tax return. It's kind of the easiest way to kind of determine some of that at-large criteria. All students who are eligible do need to complete the FAFSA, and so you have to have a FAFSA on file. Then you can complete the New York TAP application. In our financial aid offer letters that have gone out, a lot of times you will see an estimated TAP award. we have a little program that runs behind the scenes, and it's like, hey, this student's family income looks like they would qualify for a TAP. And based on our tables provided to us by the Higher Education Services Corporation, it looks like you would qualify for this amount. We start loading that information directly from them in kind of that May to June timeframe. And what you'll see is that estimated TAP award will turn into a real TAP award. What we don't know often is sometimes the Higher Education Services Corporation will ask you for some additional information. And they will need to verify income or verify residency or do some of those other things. We do our best in the financial aid office to find out that information from them and send our own communication to let you know. One other issue with that is you also can select one institution to receive that information. So if you're still picking and choosing from schools, make sure you have your TAP application done. If you have your financial aid offer from us, it'll say that estimated award. So we're like, hey, please go do that application. And then when you're ready to come to Stony Brook and be a Seawolf, make sure that you complete that portion. So I think that's an important part there. The Higher Education Services Corporation also has a few other different types of scholarships. So if you follow that QR code on the screen, it'll take you to some of their other programs. We won't go into great detail, but some of the other scholarships would be the World Trade Center, the Math and Science Teaching Incentive Scholarship, the New York State Scholarship for Academic Excellence, Veterans Tuition Awards, and a few others. In our office, we tend to refer to these as the paper application HESC forms. Really what you want to do is complete your TAP application. That unlocks the door for a lot of awards, and then go through and see if you might qualify for any of these other programs. You'll even see in the slide on the screen, it talks about the Excelsior Scholarship and the TAP Award. So I think all of these are important. The next slide is going to be an Excelsior Scholarship, so I'll wait for that. Here you go. All right, the Excelsior Scholarship is advertised in the state of New York if your family makes less than $125,000 per year, that you can go to any of the state schools tuition free. And so we're going to break that down a little bit to tell you exactly what that means. First, you need to be a New York resident. Next, you need to complete a TAP application. The criteria for the TAP application and the Excelsior Scholarship are kind of aligned now, that they both have to be under $125,000. So we often do see students that receive a TAP award and an Excelsior award. It can only be applied to tuition. And so that is one of the key terms here, is that it's tuition free. For an in-state student, our tuition is $7,070 per year. That is the maximum Excelsior award. From that, we're required, and the state requires us to subtract a TAP award. So if you get an Excelsior award, you most likely get a TAP award. If you get a Pell Grant, we also subtract that from there. So Excelsior is a last dollar award, meaning that it pays after everything else. You have 4 years to complete your degree, and you have to complete 30 credit hours after your first year, 60 after year 2, 90 after year 3, and all of the courses that you take must count towards your degree. The last part of this slide is in bold here because it does pay after every other award. We hear from many families who see the Excelsior Scholarship and think, hey, I don't have to pay for tuition, and I get a Pell Grant, and I get a TAP credit. Unfortunately, that was not how the state of New York set up the scholarship, so it is a last dollar award. This year, we have hundreds of students who are technically eligible for the Excelsior Award, but they receive a $0 award. We do kind of work with that group to make sure that they're on track, provided their family situation or their income information changes, then that would also be applicable there. All right, now let's get into the financial aid offer letter. We call this the SUNY Smart Track Award Letter. This is the letter that everyone should have received. If you filed the FAFSA, you've been admitted, and we've given you a scholarship. We send out this little form on the right here that is specific like this. The award letter is going to break it down, and I'm going to go through each slide individually, but you can see at the top, we list that estimated cost of attendance. We talk about all your aid. In the middle section, we give you what your scholarships and grants are. This allows you to calculate what's called a net price. And then you also see the student loan parts, federal work study, and then at the bottom, will see what the total cost is going to be. This lists all of your potential costs. And so let's go through each of these individually. Every school from the SUNY system and every school should send you out some form like this. And I think this is the best way when you're comparing apples to apples of what schools are like and what schools cost. We have some other institutions that are on Long Island. This is one of my other disclaimers that I like to bring up. Other schools have a higher cost of attendance, which means sometimes they offer higher scholarships. Our tuition and fees are low, so our scholarships are a little bit lower. Doesn't mean that that another school wants you more. So let's say their tuition and fees are $90,000 and they give out a $50,000 scholarship. We want you to be able to compare that to us. So 90 minus 50 means you're still paying 40. Us at 11 minus 1 means you're only paying 10. So $10,000 is less than $40,000. Just kind of keep that in mind when you're comparing institutions. Different schools have different costs, which also means they have different scholarship opportunities. So let's break down these a little piece. So these are the direct costs. So this is at the top of every award letter. This is broken down by direct, and we try to be very specific. Direct, paid to the university. Indirect, not paid to the university. If you are not planning on residing on campus, if you're living off campus or at home, that housing and meal line would move over to the indirect costs. Doesn't mean that we're billing you those amounts. It just means that's how much we have allocated, and we have said this is what we anticipate your housing costs to be. Doesn't mean you need to borrow loans for that. It just means that we have to build that into a financial aid cost of attendance budget. You'll also see books. We're not going to bill you for books. You're going to pick your books out, whether from our bookstore or some online marketplace. Transportation costs are included in there. There is a cost of getting to and from campus, so that's included. Other educational costs, we also call these personal expenses. These are the costs of buying soap, detergent, deodorant, late night pizza parties. We include that in your estimated cost of attendance because other students, when we survey them on campus, have those. Here you'll see that the estimated cost of an attendance for an in-state student is $34,258. That's our estimate for next year. You may ask about the housing and meal options. We take a weighted average of the housing options, and then we take the most popular meal plan, which is the unlimited meal plan for our students to come up with those housing costs. Next, we're going to move on to the next piece, and this really has to do with the scholarship and grant options. So here, the student was awarded a $1,000 scholarship. You also see that the student was awarded a Pell Grant, an SEOG grant, and an SBU grant. What is missing here is you'll see that there's a link for New York State aid. What we haven't put in here is like an estimated TAP award, but that you subtract any grants and scholarships to come up with the net price. Most likely in this situation, if a student has a federal Pell Grant, then they're probably also going to qualify for a TAP award. TAP award would be up to $4,800 plus a SUNY tuition credit, maybe of around another $1,200. Each of these are case dependent, so you just want to make sure. We also want to be very clear in the middle, your total amount of grants and scholarships. So this is free money off the cost of attendance. That's that $10,395 in this situation. Next, we're going to talk about other options to pay your costs. Here you will see we have listed that Federal Direct Subsidized Loan, the $3,500 that I mentioned earlier, the Federal Direct Unsubsidized Loan for $2,000, that $5,500 is the maximum that a first-year student can take out. This student also has a $2,000 work study award. Work study doesn't go directly to the bill. It's paid in a biweekly paycheck, and the students would use that most likely to help either cover some of those personal expenses or those educational costs. There are also some blue hyperlinks on this form. Non-federal private educational loans are listed on there. That'll take you to our website where we have kind of a smart rank order thing that will give you some additional information. Federal Direct Plus Loan or parent loans, those are an option. There's a form and a credit check that would be required there. And then Stony Brook also participates in what's called the Time Option Payment Plan, where you can divide up your unpaid expenses for the fall semester and the spring semester. So if you were dividing up the fall, you signed up for the program early, there's a $50 enrollment fee. They would divide that fall payment up over 4 payments. If you sign up a little bit later, they would divide it up over 3. But there is that time option payment plan. But the balance would be able to pay by the end of the term. I see a little question that popped in about like an SBU grant. Those go to our high needs students, so just kind of keep an eye on that. If you do, as I mentioned on this last slide, I'm going to skip back a slide. The student has a full Pell Grant of $73.95. That also means that that student would most likely qualify for a full TAP award. This student, I think it just had to do with timing when we did this screen. It's also making me think that maybe we should swap this out and put one in with the estimated award so we could talk about that. But full Pell Grant also means full TAP award as long as you meet the New York State requirements. On occasion, we do see some students that qualify for a full Pell Grant, but maybe their parents work in New Jersey or Connecticut, and sometimes they don't necessarily meet the qualifications for the New York State TAP Award. Those are set by the Higher Education Services Corporation, which is why we encourage everyone to go through that process. All right. Key takeaways. This gives you the net cost to attend the institution, an idea of how much you're going to be paying. So I think we're back to this main slide here. Here's what our total costs are. Here's what your net price is after we take away the grants. And then here are other options for paying it and then leaving you with what the remainder total is. Just a reminder, we do include those indirect costs. So when I'm sitting down with families, you'll see that total of indirect costs is about $4,200 a year. You don't have to pay that out of pocket. You're going to experience that during the year. So sometimes we take that off of what your total net price, to the institution is going to be. It just depends on when you're sitting down and you're kind of working through your budget, just so that you're aware of what your total costs and everything are going to be. All right. So now we've covered all of the aid options. So let's talk about the costs. And I've seen a lot of questions pop up about the costs. We have an estimated cost of attendance that would include those direct costs. So tuition, $7,070. Out-of-state tuition would be $31,046. We also have fees that are added on top of that for $39.38. Housing, that's our weighted average. So we estimate that to be about $11,740. The meal plan is that $7,304. So costs are a little bit different if you're a commuter living off campus or on campus. We can factor that in. If you filled out your FAFSA, or if you, we typically assume every student is going to reside on campus their first year. Later, we would update those to an off-campus budget. It doesn't necessarily change any type of the grants or the scholarships that we are going to offer you. It just means that we're changing the total costs that are going to be out of pocket. You also see that the books, transportation, and personal expenses are the same for our residents or non-residents to kind of include there. When we're doing this presentation, sometimes this is some of the first time that people have actually looked at what the costs are. I always like to say that college does cost money, but here in the financial aid office, we do our best to make financial aid affordable and provide access and affordability in higher education. So that's what we want to do. Payment plan options. I talked a little bit more about the time option payment plan. These are monthly payment plans. So let's say you have scholarships and grants, and they cover a good portion of what your fall charges are, and that leaves, let's say, a $4,000 balance. If you set up a 4-time payment plan, that would be $1,000 a month for 4 months. If it's more than that, it would be more. If it's less than that, it would be less. Aid often disperses or pays at different times throughout the term. Anytime you have financial aid and it's been accepted, you're protected from making that payment plan, or you're making that payment. Like if we haven't given it to you yet. So for example, a TAP award typically disperses later into the semester. We leave that on your aid package. And so you're only responsible for what your bill is, less any anticipated aid that you have. If your financial situation does change, and we see a lot of that, something happens related to kind of death, divorce, loss of income, loss of employment, we do have a process that would be available for that. It's called a reevaluation request. We typically start taking those on May 1st. We're happy to talk about what your situation is and kind of help you out. Sometimes students who maybe have a full Pell Grant and then they have a loss of income, there's not really much that we can do in that situation. Our goal in a loss of income would be to try to increase your grant eligibility, which would most likely be the federal Pell Grant piece. And that kind of helps us get through that process. Are there opportunities to appeal for more aid? We carefully take a look at what your academic record is, and we take a look at our scholarships, and we also take a look at our costs, and there really isn't an opportunity to appeal the aid package that you have. If you do have a significant change in your grades, or maybe you have a late ACT or SAT score that comes in that might reevaluate your scholarship piece, that may be something that we would take a look at. Our goal is to give you the most amount of that grant and scholarship aid that we can, but we do have limits on the total amount of scholarships. So if you've already received our top scholarship or you've already received a full Pell Grant, there aren't really a lot of opportunities there. At some point in time, some of our aid packages get to the point where some students, are a few $1,000s short of covering the cost. That's where, maybe a summertime job, saving up, some type of family support, whether that be with direct support or whether that be with, credit-worthy cosigner or taking out a loan. Those are opportunities to really kind of make up some of those differences. When you apply to Stony Brook, we usually take a look after your 6th semester grade. So if you applied later and your 7th semester grades significantly improved, or maybe even your 8th semester grades improved, those are times when we would take a look at your scholarship offerings. Also keep in mind that sometimes scholarships are awarded specifically based on what your major is going to be. And so there are sometimes limits or popular programs that we don't extend kind of higher scholarship levels. So I think all of those are important factors to really kind of take a look at. Lots of families, or a number of families, have 529 college savings plans. These are very wide, I would say, in how to kind of collect this information. So a 529 plan, let's start with the definition first. A tax advantage investment account designed to help promote savings. Typically, there's some type of state tax benefit that's been in. So the state of New York has a 529 plan. It saves a significant amount off of, it's a pretty good trade-off with a 529 plan. So if you don't have one, you might think about opening one. Now, how do you get that? Well, it has tax advantages so that your income isn't taxed on top of it. New York has a state tax deduction. Other states have tax deductions. The funds need to be used for qualified educational expenses. Depending on your plan, what they really want is a bill. So our billing cycle, our bills go out somewhere around the 20th of July with the first payment due date of August 15th. Those can vary just slightly. If you have a 529 plan, you're going to take that bill, you're going to send it to them, and then you're going to tell them how much you want to take out of your 529 plan. Depending on your 529 plan partner, sometimes they send the money directly to an institution like us. Sometimes they will cut a check to you in care of the institution, and you have to turn them in. This is kind of one of those questions, or you would just want to explore the 529 plan and take a look and see exactly how that might work. Qualified educational expenses, tuition fees, housing, and meals, and it can be used directly to cover what those costs are going to be. Resources for families, I think, this is an important one. The FAFSA website is studentaid.gov. Scholarship search tools. Here at Stony Brook, we have a program called Scholarship Universe that will be available for our first-year students in the coming weeks. We list any departmental awards. There are about 300 scholarships that are contained in there. External scholarship resources, fastweb.com, College Board, scholarships.com, local and community organizations. This year we had a student who brought in a little over $30,000, in-state student who brought in a little over $30,000 from local and community organizations. Fill out the applications. I helped one of our local groups review some scholarships just this last week. And I think there were only 12 or 13 applications for like 5 or 6 scholarships. So don't overlook those, don't sleep on those. The one thing about local and community organizations, they're usually just a one-time award. They're not renewable, but anything helps when it comes to cutting what the costs are going to be. Our financial aid office is always here to help. We receive, more than half of our inquiries by email, and you'll get a response back from our team really quick. Be kind of detailed. Sometimes we're going to ask some additional questions. We're going to take a look at your situation. That's where we can verify who you are, and we can provide some more specific information. It's like, hey, how would you do this, or how would you do that? So I think that works there. All right, so here's your timeline. May 1st deposits are due. We encourage you to put your deposit in. We want to get you here and get you enrolled and get you in the pipeline as soon as possible. In that June-July timeframe, bills are going to be generated. That first due date is most likely going to be the 15th of August. August, you'll see fall is when the bill is going to be paid, and then bills come out from the Office of Student Financial Services. If your financial aid is more than what your charges are, then we issue what's called a financial aid refund. That can be sent directly to you. The bursar's office, Student Financial Services, will follow up with how to set up direct deposit. They use a third-party service through Chase that will allow the money to go directly into your bank account. As I mentioned earlier, sometimes we do different disbursement dates. So a Pell Grant and loans is dispersed about a week before scholarships, before scholarships are. So just kind of keep that in mind. So you may receive aid payments and then maybe a refund at some point later in the term, and handle that process. All right, other resources, Net Price Calculator. This is kind of one of those tools to determine how much aid you might get if you haven't already received that. If you scan this QR code, it'll also take you to the new student timeline, undergraduate costs, and just kind of, we have a good question and answer page. Our question and answer page has a lot of the questions that you have actually asked, I think, in the chat that I've seen kind of popped up. We're closing in on 100 questions that our team has answered. And I think we're going to answer a few of these kind of live as we go through. Yeah. So, all right. So let's start the Q&A session. I think Amanda's going to pop in. She's going to ask me some questions, and I think I'm going to do my best to answer those. That sound good, Amanda?
That sounds great. You gave so much information that I'm sure everyone's head is like, ah, but luckily this session is being recorded so you can watch the parts that you missed while you were asking questions again at a later time. So the first question that we have for you, Nick, is, let's see. Lindsay said, oh, do students receive a scholarship if they are accepted into the honors college, or let's just say a university honors program?
Yeah, so for students that are accepted into the honors college, what we do is we do our best to extend our highest presidential award. I know the honors college is still making a few decisions about their applicants. So if the scholarship is less than what our largest scholarship offer would be, then we are going back in and we're making those adjustments. I know that the admissions team was working on that earlier this afternoon, and I think part of that just has to do with a little bit of the timing of when honors decisions and honors program decisions are sent out. So, okay.
Yes. Okay. So we have a couple of questions about financial aid, and specifically federal grants and how those work, how many types are there, and how do they differ from a federal loan?
So I think earlier we had a nice slide on kind of grants and scholarships. So grants are typically some type of need-based. So New York residents complete a TAP application or an Excelsior application. U.S. citizens can complete the FAFSA application. All of those would be used to determine grant funding for students that have kind of high financial need. We kind of define that differently. There's not necessarily a dollar amount or an AGI amount for a student to receive a Pell Grant. But the state of New York added a little bit of transparency and said, well, if you make less than $125,000 a year, you're guaranteed to receive, some type of TAP award or the Excelsior award that would cover your tuition to attend. And so I think each of those kind of play in. Does that kind of answer that question, Amanda?
Yes.
Okay.
Another question that I've seen come up a few times is about what exactly a scholarship and grants cover, and is it possible to have scholarships and grants without loans cover everything, tuition, room, board, fees, etc.?
Yeah, and I think this is maybe I think this is kind of one of those myths out there. Is I think there are a lot of families who think that students receive enough aid to cover every single expense through scholarships and grants. And as a public institution, we do not meet that benchmark. I think this week there was some news about even one of the Ivy League schools, Harvard. You can go tuition free to Harvard if you make less than $200,000 a year. What that doesn't include is all those extra expenses and your housing costs. So that isn't even kind of one of those full ride pieces. The closest that you're really going to get to a full ride at any institution is probably what we would consider kind of a head count student and maybe athletics. So like a football player, a basketball player, a tennis player. They're going to receive aid that is going to be equal to or close to equal to what that institutional cost of attendance is. By and large, most students at institutions nationwide are going to receive enough aid to cover, a significant portion of what their total costs are. They may be able to go tuition free. They may be able to go tuition and fee free. They may be able to cover part of their other aid. But most of the students do come up with, some type of little gap. And if we were a perfect institution and we could meet 100% of needs, we would cover that gap. But unfortunately, we are unable to do that based on the funding that we have from the state. One way we cut those costs are our tuition is set by the state of New York. And so our tuition hasn't increased since 2015, I believe. So imagine that 10 years with no tuition increases. What we have seen increase are kind of those housing and meal expenses. Other institutions have seen significant increases on what their tuition costs have been over the last 10 years. So I think that kind of helps answer your question, Amanda.
Yes, it definitely does. I just want to remind everyone in the Q&A, we don't have anyone from the honors programs here today, and I'm the only admissions person. So if you would be so kind as to email us in admissions at enroll@stonybrook.edu with any questions about honors programs, we'd be happy to send you that information tomorrow. So we have a question that I've seen a few times, and this is one I know students get very anxious about college and doing well, but they want to know if their merit scholarship or presidential scholarship could be taken away. And in what situation could that happen?
Yeah, so for everyone who gets a scholarship, we send out what's called the terms and conditions. So really the first thing that we're looking at is that you have kind of that 3.0 GPA range. So if you don't do well academically, then you may lose your scholarship. We do guarantee those scholarships for 4 years as long as you meet the criteria. One of the other pieces that we write in there is that we're looking for you not to change your major. And so this is one that is that we do review students to see what I would call is how drastically you're changing your major. But as long as you're doing what you need to do and you're going to graduate from Stony Brook, a lot of times those scholarships are held harmless. So if you have questions about changing your major, drop us an email. We'll take a look. We'll provide you some expert advice about how that may or may not impact what your scholarship is. But we see a lot of students who continue that scholarship all 4 years to help cut the costs. If you have a $1,000 or $2,000 or $3,000 scholarship from us, our tuition, once again, is $7,070 a year. So a significant portion of that is being covered by a scholarship. Amanda, kind of along those lines is
Yep.
One of the frequent questions that we do get is other schools offer different scholarship amounts. That is true. Sometimes those are SUNY schools, sometimes those are other schools. A lot of times it comes down to what your major is, what your grades are, kind of what the total costs are. So if you have any of those questions, we're always happy to answer them. But we do our best to make sure that we are providing an incentive for you to come to Stony Brook and that we're rewarding you for the grades that you put in high school. I know there was one question up here at the top where someone asked, well, I have a friend who majored in the same thing and my scholarship was different than theirs. It's difficult for us to compare scholarship offers because what we're really doing behind the scenes is kind of comparing those grades. So a bigger discussion would be, have you taken AP courses or what are your SAT or ACT scores? A lot of those things factor into what our scholarship offers are going to be as well.
Yes, I just saw that question. That was a good one. So we also had a question, which I'm always curious about. If I'm looking at my InSolar at my award, and there are different options for subsidized and unsubsidized loans, can I tell you how much of the loan I want to take, or do I accept it all and then give it back? What are my options?
I love this question. I love this question. So earlier I encouraged you, hey, sometimes people will ask, let me spin this slightly differently. Somebody will say, well, I know I'm going to qualify for loans, but I don't want them. Do I need to fill out the FAFSA? And we would encourage everyone to fill out the FAFSA. It calculates your student aid index, and sometimes we have scholarships that require need. And we define that very broadly, that if you have $1 of need, sometimes we're able to give you a need-based scholarship, but sometimes that's written as the criteria. When it comes to loans, we only want you to take out what you need. And so the maximum a freshman can take out is $5,500. So when you're looking at that financial aid offer letter, when you log into Solar and you want to accept your awards, there are a couple of awards that you do need to accept. You need to accept a WOFE grant. You need to accept an SEOG grant. You need to accept student loans. When you check that accept box, it'll actually gray it out and you can actually reduce it. So if you were offered a $3,500 subsidized loan, check the accept box and you only want to take out $1,000, it'll allow you to reduce that. Please note that loans are split half for fall and half for spring. So let's say you don't take out that full amount, Amanda, and you want to take out just a little bit less. Let's say it's March and you're like, ooh, it's time for spring break and I spent too much money on spring break and I need money for clothing or, some other, let's say educationally related expenses. We can process the loan up to what those maximums are. So it's not a take it, in August or July or right now, and that's your decision for the entirety. We only want you to take out what you want. So if you want to borrow $2,000 now and you want to borrow $1,000 next month, we can process that. One of the constraints, though, is the academic term has to be valid. So let's say, we can only loan you during the academic period. So fall and spring, once spring's over or once fall's over, we can't give you once spring is over, we can't give you any loans. So if you're here for the fall and spring, then we can kind of work out some things. But once the end of the spring term happens, we can't process any loans for the 25-26 school year.
Okay, that's great. And there's two questions. One that's kind of a follow-up to what you were just talking about, which is, what if I want to do something in the summer, like take a summer class or, do something that's on campus and academic related? Where can my financial aid or loans fit in? And then I'll ask the second one after.
Yeah, so that's a good question. So summer financial aid it's based on the institution. So Stony Brook is what we call a header school. So our summer comes out of the next year. So let's say you decided you were enrolling this summer for some reason. We would award that aid out of the 25-26 school year. If you're here for fall 25, spring 26, and then you're like, hey, summer 26, I had so much fun, I want to stay on campus. Then we would use your next year's FAFSA, determine what your aid eligibility is. There's that maximum amount of loans that you can have, which is $5,500 for the year. So if you're taking out loans in the summer, you may have less for the fall and spring. But if you're eligible for something like a Pell Grant, you can get that during the summer term, and that can help cover your costs. We see a number of students that are maybe Pell Grant eligible that try to take an online course in the summer because they know a significant portion of that would be paid for. We also have some students that would take, a full assortment of classes during the summer term. So we look for your enrollment in the summer term before we make that determination. We also have a lot of students this time of year like, hey, I'm thinking about doing a study abroad program. What would that look like during the summer? Those are great questions to pop by our office or drop us an email and we can kind of talk about the impact of aid for you.
Thank you. Just so everyone knows, you're not required to do anything in the summer or take any summer classes. Yep. I just want to make that clear. So this question, I think is very good because this whole process can be confusing when you're not doing it all the time. So the question was, is it better to apply for TAP through the New York State website or through the FAFSA website? And so could you just go over the order of like what you have to do first for New York State residents versus out-of-state residents?
Yeah, so whoever asked that question, I think maybe had another student who went through school. So last year, the FAFSA process changed. So 2 years ago, when you filled out the FAFSA, there was this cool little checkbox that said, hey, I would like state aid and I'm from New York. And then the FAFSA information would go to the state of New York and you would kind of automatically start that TAP application process. For this year, the 24-25 FAFSA, that link is not available. And for 25-26, that link isn't available. So kind of your order of operations would be, 1, I hope you filed your FAFSA. And 2, we hope that you file your TAP application. So go to that hesc.ny.gov website, complete your TAP application. It came out about the same time that the FAFSA opened this year. And we already have, a few thousand students that have completed their TAP application. It's not too late to do that. There's plenty of time. So that's that one piece. The next step is we've talked about the Excelsior Award a few times. That application doesn't usually come out until somewhere around Memorial Day. On the HES website, there's a link you can sign up and they will notify you when it becomes available, and then you would want to complete that application. This year we had a handful of students that didn't realize that there was an open date for the Excelsior application and a close date. So this year they closed it right around the end of August. So you have between May and August to complete the Excelsior application, which would guarantee that families under 125,000 have at least $7,070 of aid. So make sure you keep that in mind. So just to rehash, fill out your FAFSA. Go to the HES website, complete a TAP application, sign up to be notified of when the Excelsior application opens, and then complete your Excelsior application. One thing that we didn't necessarily mention about the Excelsior application, and I see it's in the chat now, is that you do agree to reside in the state of New York for every year that you receive the award. Otherwise, it could turn into a loan. So that is one of the other components of that Excelsior award.
And another kind of follow-up question about Excelsior Scholarship, which comes up a lot. So it's about the timing of you're receiving a financial aid award letter now, you're committing to the university by May 1st, and then the application for Excelsior opens, and then you don't qualify. How does that work? And what are the options if you don't qualify for it for some reason and don't find out until the summer?
Yeah, I think that would be an impact at our institution or any other institution in the state of New York. If you take a look at the financial aid offer letter that we sent you, we have done a lot of work to add that estimated TAP award, and we're pretty happy with the results of that. We also have an estimated Excelsior award listed on there, and so we're pretty happy with that. The only way that that wouldn't kind of come to fruition if there was some issue with your family and income and the state of New York. And I think earlier I gave the example of maybe income comes from New Jersey or income comes from Connecticut instead of the state of New York. Sometimes that can impact your eligibility for both TAP and Excelsior. So I think that would be one component there.
That's great. Thank you. So definitely pay close attention to the award letter. Always email financial aid with questions for clarity. If there's something you're just not understanding, they have an incredible team that will always help you. Nick, any final kind of words of wisdom from your experience working with Stony Brook Seawolves about the financial aid process and paying for college?
Yeah, I mean, I think paying for college is at some point college does cost money. So kind of keep that in mind. Another thing is it's kind of like it's a little elusive. I think everyone believes that everything gets covered, and I think that's sort of one of those misconceptions that are out there. Another one is that student loans are a way to access higher education. You would be surprised how many students get so close to covering all their costs, and then they don't want to take out, a $3,000 or $4,000 loan to cover the rest. And I think they've been scared to take out loans. If you're taking out, a few $1,000s a year, our average student graduates from Stony Brook with about $20,000 of student loan debt. That's a payment of about $220 a month for 10 years for a college degree that on average earns the recipient somewhere between $1.5 and $2 million more of income in their lifetime. So, be careful with student loans, but don't be afraid of student loans. I think that's an important part. The other thing is you have there are about 16 of us from financial aid that are here tonight. We're here to help you. We're here to explain the process, whether that be with us here at Stony Brook or another institution. We want you to make the best decision. And I think keep this in mind tonight if you get anything. One is every school, every student has a personal fit, they have an academic fit, and they have a financial fit. And sometimes you're only going to get 2 of those 3. And so sit down at the family dinner table and talk about what's most important to you in attending your institution. Yeah, I think that works, Amanda. Otherwise, our team is more than happy to help. Drop us an email, give us a call. We're more than happy to answer your individual specific questions.
Yeah, that is great advice. Perfect conclusion to the presentation. I wish everyone the best of luck with your decisions. Admissions we've done our decisions, and now we hope that you can confidently make your college choice by May 1st. Again, for any admissions related questions about honors or advanced placement credits or college credits earned in high school, all that fun stuff, email us at enroll@stonybrook.edu. And for all financial aid questions, please email finaid@stonybrook.edu. So again, thank you for attending. Congratulations, everyone, and have a wonderful rest of your senior year. Good night.